Today on TBN, Virtual Beginnings. How did the remote start of the year alter fall sports and new students transition to masters? COVID at college. How's the handling of the pandemic at certain universities shaking up the student experience? We'll talk to Masters alums who've been impacted. And bracing for re-entry. With Masters ready to welcome day students back to campus, what can be learned from other local schools who already opened their doors? All this and more next. Hello everyone and welcome into the Tower Broadcast Newsroom. I'm your host Logan Schijano and we're following the latest news. The start of the 2020 school year has been unlike any other. We've met teachers and classmates over Zoom, grappled with complicated national issues like the upcoming presidential election, and strived to create a better Masters after issues of racism and inequality were brought to the forefront by members of our community this summer. Surely there's been many obstacles, but there's also been a lot of opportunity. Though classes took to the screen, there were several moments where students and teachers were able to come together. Here's my coverage on the new student orientation and grade level picnics.
Hello. How are you?
How's it going?
After over 6 months away from campus, Masters students who live locally returned for grade picnics throughout the month of September. For sophomore Luke Burns, things looked a little different when he first arrived.
It's definitely weird because things are like I remember, but it's also really different now because obviously we're not allowed inside and we're wearing masks and stuff, but it's really nice to see everybody.
Junior Kayla Shelley saw the picnics as an opportunity to interact not just with close friends, but other classmates and faculty whom she had not seen since March.
I think what I've missed the most is talking to people that I'm not necessarily super close with, but maybe people I would sit next to in class and just talk to before class started or something.
During the first 2 weeks of on-campus activities, a series of inflatable games made an appearance, thanks to Director of Student Activities, Ed Gormley.
Well, I figured your first time back, we should have some fun things going on. The most popular one is the soccer darts over there. It's just a giant dartboard, and that's just good fun. And the other things are the pool billiards, Connect Four basketball, and some games over there. But my real favorite, is the dunk tank.
The new student orientation took place on September 9th and was packed with icebreaker activities and an on-campus scavenger hunt. Freshman Violet Paul was impressed, considering the challenging circumstances.
Did a really good job, and I think that it's a really hard problem to try to solve. So I think that what they're doing, I mean, at least for me, it works. We have time where there's structure, and then we have some time where it's just sitting on a hill and talking to people.
Nevertheless, she and other new students were understandably nervous.
It was a little bit intimidating at first, just seeing all the people there.
Shelley had some advice.
Don't be afraid to talk to new people. I know it's really scary. I came in as a freshman and I was really scared to talk to people, but everyone here is really friendly and they want to get to know you. They want to help you out. So just put yourself out there and people will come and help you and get to know you and be friends with you.
After meeting 4 times in 13 days to begin the year, freshman class dean Renee Hurley already saw a noticeable difference among students.
The one thing I've noticed from the first day till now is that we've gone from new kids and returning kids. I didn't see that today. It was very much everybody was starting to mix, and that was nice.
With these on-campus events came the implementation of safety measures by the school, including a health pre-screen, a mask requirement, and circles on the field to space students out while eating. Students were expected to maintain social distance, but that wasn't always the case.
Especially in the first day, there was not a problem, but it was harder to try to keep 6 feet apart because you're seeing everyone for the first time, and it's kind of just an awkwardly far distance where it's not so far that you can't talk to someone not one-on-one, but it's not close enough that you can speak at a regular speaking level.
Now, while it's not possible for all students to attend these on-campus gatherings, freshman Mo Jo said she still had some virtual opportunities to get to know the boarding community and other international students.
We have virtual Olympic. It's very fun. I think I've made some of friends, all the Chinese in our grade, because some of our class are kind of created for international students, and I have contact with them.
Logan Schijano, TBN, the Masters School. Preseason for athletes like myself marks a homecoming of sorts, a return to campus after a long summer, a reunion with coaches and teammates. Of course, nothing was typical about this year's preseason, and nothing has been typical about this year's sports season as a whole. However, there's hope.
I feel like it's definitely a lot more difficult to find the motivation to run, because you don't have someone there holding you accountable.
This sentiment is shared among master's students participating in fall sports this year. With the season kicking off virtually and the fate of competition still unclear, teams are trying to find ways to keep their morale up and stay in shape.
We've done a lot of workouts that are geared towards tennis movements and tennis strength building. So hopefully, even though it has been a challenge, that it's been productive.
We've had like themed practices. So one practice, everyone wore their bat mitzvah dresses or prom dresses, and we all just dressed up really fancy and pranked our coach. We also had a purple workout day, and everyone wore purple on the Zoom, so we looked really color coordinated.
Athletes have met twice a week with their teams via Zoom. Still, there's a lot that's been missed, especially preseason.
Preseason is always really fun, and we do a lot of running, but I think it brings us together in a certain way. We all struggle through the pain, and I think because of that, we bond, and we didn't have the chance to do that this year.
Contact is so important with volleyball, especially doing it with another person. So I do have siblings, but they don't play volleyball. So I'm able to play with them, but it would be better to, play with other kids.
Yet, the ultimate goal is the same. Be ready for competition.
We discuss plays.
Something I do like is that we've been given like a weekly, like a training plan, so like things we have to do every week. And it says like amount of time and distance we should run and like different like categories we should be working in.
On Thursdays, we usually do workouts. Last Thursday, we did a HIIT workout. We've been doing running, and we also did yoga. That was fun. And we just try to stay active as much as possible.
Some teams even took initiative to get together on their own time.
So we made a Google form with kind of everybody's town that they live in, so we can kind of coordinate who lives near who. And so we've kind of made it into like a once a week kind of thing if possible. And I know a lot of other people have been trying to coordinate to play as well.
We had a team meetup and we all got pizza. And I think that was fun because we got to meet in person and kick a ball around for a few minutes.
And with day students able to come back to campus for in-person learning starting October 5th, Director of Athletics Logan Condon said in-person sports will return as well.
We're planning on doing sports after school 5 days a week. So each of our athletes who return to campus will be able to meet with their coaches and their teams. It's our campus policy, as well as a lot of other campuses, that you need to wear a mask at all moments. So we are requiring our athletes to wear masks.
Condon also said that there will continue to be remote practices for students who choose to stay home or are boarders. As for any games this fall, Condon said there's, quote, a good chance.
The state is saying that we cannot leave our region until basically the last week in October. So we just have to find more local schools, and we've been having conversation. And even if that does not come to fruition, we have had conversations about what an intramural program will look like and a squad program. And we are actively seeking out, all avenues to get some sort of competitive piece added to the practice regimen.
Logan Schijano, TBN, New York. The United States continues to grapple with issues of systemic racism that have plagued Black people and other people of color for far too long in this country. This past summer, members of our community spoke about these issues, and administration responded by creating an anti-bias, anti-racism plan that deals with issues from the board level to the classroom. Now, joining me now are Vianney Lara, Shamira Guillem, and Maddie Blake, all three of whom are diversity ambassadors at Masters and have played key roles over the summer helping to develop Masters' equity and inclusion plan. Maddie, Vianney, and Shamira, thank you all so much for being here today. Now, Shamira, I wanted to get started with you and ask you the first question, kind of starting a little more broadly on this subject. So I know all three of you are very committed in the battle for social justice and equality. And I know that these issues are things that have been going on for decades, unfortunately, in America. That said, this summer following the murder of George Floyd, there was almost a national reckoning of sorts and a movement that gained momentum probably like never before. You had people in the streets for weeks on end, and sadly, this has been one of a long list of Black victims of police brutality. But I wanted to ask you, what do you believe allowed the movement to gain momentum like it did this summer?
Something about this instance, it was very explicit, and there was no like in this situation, I feel as though people kind of saw and felt that there was something wrong immediately after watching the video. And then two, I think that it's kind of like, I know that the Black Lives Matter movement kind of sparked a few years beforehand, and it didn't gain as much traction because not a lot of, including me, not a lot of Black people or even people in America in general, they didn't really know like the full compass of the movement. And like I personally, as like a young child, did not know like anything about like, okay, like what does this mean? All I kind of heard from media obviously was all of the negative parts of it. And so I think that this year a lot of people were more willing to learn more about the movement, and a lot of other people were more willing to teach about the movement. There was just like a bigger community this year.
So, Maddie, I know that that movement at Masters manifested itself in one way through social media, like Shamira said, through the Instagram account Black at Masters. I know that you had been quoted a few times in posts on this account. And did you ever envision this account reaching a point where it could no longer be ignored by the administration?
I will say my expectations were for students of color to be heard and their experiences to be showed. The page has gotten submissions from from current students, former students from 30 plus years ago. So this is obviously a pattern that we all realize needs to stop. And there were people that weren't too sure if administration would listen or pay attention. And I feel like this page forced them to do so, being how public it was and how the information was out to the world. But I do realize how the administration and Ms. Danforth paid attention, and they listened and they opened their ears and their hearts to the stories shared by students of color at Masters. So I think that if we continue to hear each other and move forward instead of pretending that Masters is going to be the perfect school, because no school is perfect. Masters is amazing, but we're all going to have to take steps to make each school better than what we already are.
And so I know that over the summer, there was an effort for administration to meet with students to talk to them kind of about this and work together. What was that interaction like, and what was kind of the sentiment in the room?
At least for me, it started off with conversations with like the fellow students, and then it was conversation with Miss Brown, and then it was conversations with like the bigger administration. And I think that like at first it was a little bit of a hard pill to swallow. I know that a lot of people had like a level of skepticism, which is valid in all ways, because if you haven't experienced something, it's kind of hard to listen, or it's kind of hard to relate. And so you might have like this level of, oh, is it true? Is it not? I think that it was something that the school had to kind of warm up to, and that they were able to do so through like having conversations with student leaders and different members of the community to kind of have like our community share their experiences on one hand, and then on the other hand give advice and say, this is what we need from you.
So obviously there was hundreds of posts coming from that account, all of which were truly important. And one of the kind of comments that was almost reoccurring was coming from students was somewhat along the lines of like, I'm so surprised this could happen at my school. This is shocking. This is terrible. I'm curious kind of how you react to a comment like that. Do you see it as ignorant? And I guess I'm asking, what's the best way for a white student to show their concern while not coming off as being ignorant?
I think that's a really good question, and I think it just comes from having a listening ear and not being stuck in your own bubble. Meaning that at masters, a lot of people have their friends groups, which is the people they interact with on a daily basis. And often people of color tend to stick together, especially among the boarding community. So for a white person, a white student, or a white faculty member, I think open your eyes, don't ignore what you see, because you may think, oh, this is so shocking. But if you would pay attention and go back, you would actually realize that these things are occurring, and sometimes they're not so obvious. Most of the time they are. But I think by a person who is not of color, race has not always played such a predominant part in their lives, because it's not things that they necessarily have to worry about. But I think with this movement and just asking questions and being open to hear them, I think that would be a good first step.
And with the year just underway, it's been a couple of weeks since the start of school. We've heard a lot of administrators giving speeches publicly, voicing their support for the DEI plan that was created. And, you're starting to see some, changes in the community. They've hired, a counselor of color. There's statements on all the course syllabi, supporting equity and inclusion. Vianney, how would you assess kind of what you've seen so far, and what do you need to see moving forward to feel comfortable that this effort is really paying off?
I honestly thought that those were great steps that I didn't imagine would happen, because I've been at Masters in my freshman year, and when I came, I was in a world of shock, but the shock kind of wore off, and I adapted to survival mode, being surrounded by people of color and people I was comfortable with. But that also meant having the state of silence, where I wouldn't talk in certain classes, where I wouldn't talk to certain people. And I think that's really unfair, because it's kind of, looking back on it, hindered my experience at Masters and its full capacity. But I'm so glad that people that will come after me, after my graduating class, will be able to experience this movement that Masters is taking, because it's easy to talk. We can talk all day, but to see actual action is critical. And I wish we would continue hiring faculty of color, continuing hearing our voices, and actually taking actually doing steps of change.
So lastly, I want to circle back to kind of what I asked the very first question of the interview. And we saw how this movement sparked over the summer. But then, and this is partly due to the coverage of national media, but, we see these things go in waves almost. You see protests start to die down, and then, things spike back up. For example, we saw the killing of Rayshard Brooks, the shooting of Jacob Blake, all happened in the last few months. So from one perspective, it's a reoccurring cycle, but in truth, these issues aren't going away. They're still very prevalent. What do we need to do to make sure that this doesn't happen, that this doesn't come up and die down?
I would say hold people responsible. It's very mind-boggling that people can, for example, that cops can come into your house to kill you while you're sleeping, and there are still questions about whether or not they should be found guilty. It's confusing how there's a murder on camera, and people don't know if the people who killed the person should be found guilty. There are all these ifs, ands, and buts when the evidence and facts are right in your face. So this just goes to show how people of color will never be the first on people's minds. It will never be the first people's priority. And with this new generation, where people are forcing you to listen, forcing you to pay attention, forcing you to care, and that's something that probably wouldn't have been successful 5, 10 years ago. With these new, with, like Shamir said, new technology, new ways of thinking, new ways of life, we're able to speak our minds freely, able to do what we need to do to get our points across. And that's something I do appreciate. So I would say holding people accountable. With this new generation of kids, of people now, there's no way that this movement will be let down, it will die down, because we understand the severity of it, we understand the importance of it. So as long as, so until people are held accountable for their actions, then there's no way that this movement will die down or stop.
I just want to add really quickly, the movement has died down for the people who don't want to listen. That's a personal statement that I believe in. It's your job to decide that I don't want this to die down. If you decide that you don't want it to die down, then it will stay prevalent in your life. Make it an everyday thing. Make it like if you hear a conversation and you know that it's different for people of color, make that a conversation. Just throw it in really quickly. Try to incorporate different levels of educating people and educating yourself every day, and that will make a big change.
Yeah, and Black Lives Matter. It's not an aesthetic. It's not something to make your Instagram look pretty or your Instagram stories make you look woke. This is something that people of color live with every day. We don't get to just post about it. It's a privilege to be able to learn about racism and oppression and discrimination. It's not a privilege to experience it. It's our experiences every day. So I think if you're allowed and given the opportunity to experience it while the people around you are the ones going through it day to day, have firsthand experiences, then I feel like it's your duty to learn about it. But you can't say you care about these people and you tolerate racism. It's one thing to be anti-racist, and then it's one thing to educate the people around you too.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Maddie, Shamira, Vianney, for all of those words and insights. I really appreciate you all taking the time to join me today. And I know, like you said, this is an ongoing movement, and we all need to be listening as much as possible moving forward. Now, while Masters is getting ready to welcome students to the field and the classroom next week, a lot of schools, including colleges and universities across the country, have already done so. Some, like University of South Carolina and University of Wisconsin-Madison, have struggled to contain the coronavirus on their campuses. Others have done quite well. Let's take a look at how former master's students are balancing the college experience and COVID.
It was like a cold, I was tired. I lost my taste and my smell, which was the worst. And I can taste again. I still can't smell anything. I haven't been able to smell anything for weeks.
Those were Sophia Benson's symptoms. The master's class of 2020 graduate, who's in her first year at University of Wisconsin-Madison, tested positive for COVID-19 on September 8th and was forced to quarantine just weeks after her arrival on campus.
I was in a friend of mine's dorm. It was me and my roommate and her roommate. And we were all just sitting and talking in her dorm. And then we got back to our room. The next day we got a text message that our friend whose dorm we were in tested positive.
After 2 negative tests and quarantining in their dorm room, Benton and her roommate thought they were in the clear. But after some other friends developed symptoms...
Then we got tested again on the 8th, and our positive test came on the 9th. So it was about a week and a half where we were isolating just the two of us and pretty much quarantining in our room just in case. And then when we got it, it was not really a surprise.
Benson's case is not a rarity at Wisconsin, which has had over 2,700 positives since reopening for in-person learning back in August. The school, which was forced to put 2 freshman dorms on lockdown and revert to online classes, didn't require students to get tested before they arrived.
We were just required to get one the day of our move-in, and that test ended up coming back 3 days later for me. And I was negative when I got there, but had I been positive, I would have spread it to everyone I met those first 3 days. So that was a little bit of a problem because people came to campus with it.
While Benson credits the university for getting its act together in recent weeks, she said there's not much she personally would have done differently.
I think I was as careful as I could have been without while also just making friends and living my life a little bit. I think here, at least in the beginning, the only way to prevent yourself from getting corona would be to stay in your room at all times, which is like super unpractical.
While Wisconsin still struggles to contain the outbreak, other schools like Bucknell University have been relatively COVID-free. Masters alum Haley Casper attributes that to frequent testing and strict protocols.
We have to get routinely tested every 10 days. So it's really up to the student to make their appointment. I don't know, I feel like in high school I was so used to all the reminders and stuff, but here it's you got to go every 10 days, and if you don't, you're out. There's like an app, and they're doing contact tracing with it, so they can see where you've been, contact you if you've been in contact with someone who has COVID.
Out of over 24,000 administered tests, Bucknell has less than 20 positives. Casper said the students have a lot to do with the success.
Everyone at Bucknell at least really wants to make it work, and we know having a party on Friday night with 100 people in a crowded room, that won't work, and we can't do that.
Gabe Keller, also a 2020 graduate, goes to Colorado College, which had a similar number of cases, just 13, but was pressured into sending students off campus just weeks after the start of the year.
El Paso County was cracking down on us. They essentially sent us off campus because they were like, if you don't have to be here, there's going to be rolling quarantines for this semester, and there's no way we can prevent that because the county was basically saying you guys have to quarantine if you have like 1 or 2 cases in a dorm. You have to quarantine the whole dorm.
Keller said that while the situation is unfortunate, it did not come as much of a surprise.
Quarantining for 2 weeks, like once a month, is not sustainable. It doesn't create an enjoyable experience, and I would much rather be home than have to deal with that. I wanted to have a good freshman experience, but there's always a part of me that kind of knew that was impossible.
Being at home was exactly what Brian Margolis didn't want. When Lafayette College, his intended school, committed to remote learning, Margolis decided to look elsewhere.
I didn't want to defer because I had already spent second semester of my senior year at home online. And I didn't want to spend another semester like online typing away at Zoom, and like it wasn't the proper steps for me.
Margolis enrolled at High Point University just days before the start of classes. He said he has no regrets, but concedes the COVID-19 protocols are few and far between.
There were not really any protocols other than wear a mask, and they don't test us unless you have symptoms. So there could be a bunch of asymptomatic cases walking around right now that we don't know about. Every day I step out of my room, it's a risk.
But it's a risk he's willing to take.
If I get it, and have to quarantine here, I'd be fine with that because it means I can get it over with and I won't risk exposing family members.
Benson believes this feeling is mutual among college students.
Well, it's just like weird to think that like I spent 6 months of my life like trying so hard not to get a virus and like got it like 2 weeks into school. It's a very different mentality, especially when it started to spread and certain people's like friends started getting it. Like a lot of like students' mentality switch from like I don't want to get it to I want to get it over with.
Logan Schijano, TBN, New York.
Joining me now to talk more about the reopening of schools locally is Priya Singhvi, the Director of Health and Wellness at Rye Country Day School, and Liam Bieber, the Student Body President at RCDS. Liam, Ms. Singhvi, thank you both so much for joining us today. Now, I know Rye Country Day made the decision to open school on September 18 for in-person learning on a hybrid system. So half the school would go in 1 week for in-person learning and the other half would learn online, and then they would flip-flop the next week. So as you know, Masters began the year virtually for month of September. So I'm curious because Masters and RCDS are very close by, but what factors did RCDS take into consideration that told the school that it was safe and it was time to reopen when you did?
There were lots of things that went into the decision-making process. I think most of that obviously was state-driven. And so when Cuomo sort of gave us the green light, we wanted to make sure that we did everything that we could to ensure safety while on campus. And we're lucky to have the resources and the space to be able to spread out our classrooms and be able to also support on-campus pool testing was another big part of this. So, and wearing masks is mandated while on campus. So those three things I think were probably the biggest determining factor.
Can you explain a little bit more for the viewers what on-campus pool testing looks like?
Once a week, every student takes these little tubes, right? And they have a little device
that you pretty much just put your saliva in. It takes like 2 or 3 minutes. It's really not too bad. And then you get a personal QR code. These tubes are collected and tested together. And if one of the tests comes back positive, they have your QR code so they can bring 20 people back to do individual testing. And in that way, it's a lot more efficient.
Great. And I also understand there was an orientation that occurred the week before school. Was that to go over COVID protocols for being on campus? What kind of things happened during that orientation?
Sure. I feel like it was a pretty even mix. I know the biggest part of orientation, I would say, is definitely just learning the new rules of campus. Like, for example, when you're walking in the hallways, we now have arrows on the carpet. You have to go with the flow of things so that we don't have crisscrossing people. But it was also mixed in with a lot of diversity, equity, and inclusion work. And then obviously we made a lot of time. I'd say maybe 2 of the hours of each grade got their own orientation day, right? I'd say about 2 of the hours were meant for activity and like fun stuff that you could do, obviously socially distanced.
Absolutely. So, Ms. Singhvi, I know Liam mentioned a couple things and getting to know sort of how things work in the classrooms and in the hallways. Can you talk a little bit more about some of the new protocols that RCDS has in place to make sure, everyone is staying safe and mitigating the risk of contracting COVID-19?
Yeah, I think it's primarily, the things that I had mentioned before. So obviously social distancing, wearing masks, as much as we can, no shared materials. So there's not like in art classes pre-K to 12, there's individual bins. We're doing no mass gatherings. Lunch obviously looks quite different with individual containers. So yeah, really prioritizing, I think, health and safety first. And as we evolve with time, we're hoping we can build in as much community that we can do safely.
So, Liam, I'm curious to know from your perspective, how, with all these kind of things that you're having to, and other students are having to abide by, I guess, how does that feel? Does it feel uncomfortable? Obviously it's important, but I guess, what would you describe kind of when you walked into class the first day?
I would say, I would be lying to you if I didn't say it felt strange. But obviously, I think that was expected for all students. I wouldn't really say that it's much harder in terms of compatibility than normal school, though. I think that learning can pretty much, you can learn the same material with or without a mask on, with social distancing or not, with maybe the exceptions of like classes that really participate together.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned that because a lot of our classes at Masters are very discussion based. So it's definitely going to take a lot of getting used to. Now, Liam, I know you are student body president. So what kind of responsibility do you see in that role?
I really think that my role, especially in these trying times, is pivotal because I like the concept of leading by example. And I think that if I follow these rules and make an effort to communicate that following these rules are so important, I like to think that my classmates can do the same. And we all really value the opportunity to come into school and actually learn in person. And I think that most of our classmates are going to realize, hey, we have to abide by these protocols so that this can continue.
Right. And Ms. Singhvi, I know Liam said things were going smoothly to date. Has anyone gotten COVID yet in the community, if you're able to share that?
Well, our pool testing is actually posted publicly on New York State, and we have all negatives thus far.
Oh, that's great to hear so far. What are the plans if someone were to get COVID-19? What kind of things do you have in place? Would you consider going back to remote learning, or how would you deal with it?
Yeah, I think that can go a number of routes. But part of the pool testing is also to help catch symptoms early. And if people are abiding by the community compact and they are symptomatic, they're going to make the choice to stay home so it's not spread by the community. But further steps on if someone is COVID positive and what the next steps are will sort of vary by situation.
Of course, I hope that nothing too serious occurs. get masters and anywhere for that matter. So the pivotal question, I guess, that I wanted to ask you today is, now being that it's been a couple weeks since RCDS has gone back to the classroom and Masters is bracing for a return next week, what kind of advice would you give members of our community on this effort?
You know, every decision that you make will have an impact on others. So I think that's a real piece that needs to be sort of at the forefront, that, you know, decisions that you're making in time outside of school also impacts those that you're going to see in person.
And I would say to all students to really trust your teachers, administration, faculty, and everything. They are going to work in your best interest at all times. And I think that if you follow the guidelines, you have the best chance of this system of coming back to school being a success. Obviously, in a pandemic like this, nothing is going to be perfect, and everybody understands that. But just following the rules is always the best way to go when you're unsure or a situation is so uncertain like this.
Well, Ms. Singhvi, Liam, thank you both so much for your time today and your answers. And that's going to wrap up our coverage today. If you're interested in getting involved in TBN or you have feedback about the show, you can email me or talk to me in person. Stay tuned for the next edition, which will feature coverage leading up to the presidential election and more on the transition back to in-person learning. Thank you all so much for watching, and have a great day.